She stood trembling in the courtroom, her father's freedom hanging by a thread. The judge's smirk said it all. A black girl couldn't possibly outsmart the system. But what no one expected was how far she'd go to prove them wrong. Every word, every breath, every law she spoke turned doubt into silence. This wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a battle for dignity. And when the truth finally surfaced, the entire courtroom would never forget her name. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if you believe in courage, justice, and standing up for what's right. Your support helps us bring more real-life inspired stories to life. The morning sun spilled through the thin curtains of a small brick house on the corner of Willow Street. Inside, the soft hum of a gospel song drifted from the kitchen, where Amara Williams sat with her father, Marcus, over breakfast. The smell of coffee mixed with the warmth of pancakes, and for a brief moment, life felt perfectly ordinary. Amara was 22, studying criminal justice at the local university. She dreamed of becoming a defense attorney one day, not for fame or money, but because she'd seen too many good people crushed by a system that never gave them a fair chance. Her father, a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart full of wisdom, often joked that she'd grow up to set the whole city straight. Their mornings were always the same: laughter, teasing, and the steady rhythm of love that held their small world together. Marcus would talk about the customers who came to his shop, how some paid on time and others vanished after a smile and a handshake. Amara would listen, eyes shining, jotting notes for her upcoming paper on fairness in law enforcement. Outside, their neighborhood buzzed with life, kids chasing each other down cracked sidewalks, church bells echoing in the distance, and the sweet smell of baked bread from Mrs. Lewis's corner store. It wasn't fancy, but it was home, a place where people looked out for one another. But even within that comfort, some moments hinted at something uneasy, like the way the police cruiser sometimes slowed down when passing the shop, or how Marcus's tone grew quieter when the news mentioned another arrest gone wrong. Amara noticed, but she brushed it off. Her father always said, "Don't let fear live rent-free in your heart." If only she'd known how soon that fear would move in, uninvited, unstoppable, because the peace she cherished was already cracking, quietly beneath the surface, and soon, her world, and everything she believed about justice, would be put to the ultimate test. The change began quietly, like a faint echo of thunder miles away. Amara didn't notice it at first, but her father did. Marcus had been coming home later from the shop, his hands dirtier than usual, his smile weaker. One evening he sank into the couch, rubbing his temples. "Rough day?" Amara asked, setting her textbooks aside. He hesitated. "You could say that." "Some new inspector came around, asking too many questions, acting like I was running something shady." He chuckled dryly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Amara frowned. "But you've had that shop for years." "Everyone knows you," Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, everyone except people who don't want to." Over the next week, little things began to shift. A regular customer mentioned police had been asking about Marcus's shop. Another day, a delivery truck was delayed because of a random inspection. Even his landlord stopped by, warning him about keeping things clean. Marcus laughed it off, but Amara could tell it bothered him deeply. One afternoon, as she waited outside the university library, Amara's phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Headed to the station. Just a misunderstanding." "Don't worry," her stomach tightened. She called, but it went straight to voicemail. Hours passed with no reply. When he finally returned home that night, he looked exhausted, his shirt wrinkled, and his voice unsteady. "They said someone reported I was fixing cars involved in a robbery. he muttered. Nonsense, of course. But once they've decided you're guilty, it's hard to convince them otherwise. Amara's heart ached. She wanted to scream at the unfairness of it all, but Marcus stopped her. "Don't start that fight yet, baby girl," he said softly. "You save your fire for when it matters." But that night, as Amara sat awake, listening to the distant hum of sirens, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. Something bigger than a misunderstanding. The way her father's name was suddenly being whispered, the tension in his shoulders, the unease in their neighbor's eyes, it all pointed to a storm that was gathering fast. She looked over at her law books on the desk, pages filled with theories about justice, fairness, and truth, words that soon enough she would realize meant nothing. Not in a world where the color of her father's skin could rewrite every law she believed in. The night it happened was heavy, with rain and the kind that soaked through the streets and swallowed the sound of footsteps. Amara had been studying late, her books spread across the kitchen table when the clock struck midnight. Her father still wasn't home. Marcus constantly texted to see if he'd be late. Always. She tried calling, once, twice, no answer. Her chest tightened as thunder rolled outside. Then, just as she reached for her jacket, headlights flashed through the window. A police cruiser stopped in front of their house. 2 officers stepped out, rain dripping from their uniforms. "Miss Williams?" one of them called. Her throat went dry. "Yes?" The older officer removed his cap. "Your father's been taken into custody." Amara's world froze. Words blurred. All she could hear was the echo of the rain. "Custody? For what?" she stammered. "Possession of stolen property and obstruction of justice," the officer replied, his tone cold. Practiced, like he'd said those words 100 times before. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He's a mechanic. He fixes cars. He doesn't steal them." The officer looked away. "Ma'am, you can visit him in the morning." When the door closed behind them, Amara stood motionless. The warmth of the house felt hollow. She looked around, the coffee mug still on the table, his jacket hanging by the door, everything just as he'd left it. Everything normal, everything wrong. The next morning, she rushed to the station. Through a small glass window, she saw her father sitting in an interrogation room. His hands were cuffed. His eyes, tired but calm, met hers. He smiled faintly, as if trying to protect her even now. "They said I helped hide a stolen car," Marcus told her when she was finally allowed in. "It was brought in for repair. I didn't know anything about it." Amara clenched her fists. "They can't just—" "Yes, they can," he interrupted quietly. "They already did." She felt anger burn in her chest, but beneath it, a more profound fear, one she'd never known before. For the first time, she saw the cracks in the system she'd studied so passionately. The law she believed in was no shield here. That night, as she walked home alone under the flickering streetlights, her father's words echoed in her mind. "Save your fire for when it matters." She didn't know it yet, but this was when it would start to matter, when she would have to choose between believing in the law or fighting it. The next few days unfolded like a slow nightmare. Amara woke each morning hoping it had all been a mistake, that someone would call and say her father had been released, that the truth had finally come out. But instead, the opposite happened. Marcus's arrest spread across the local news. "Mechanic linked to stolen vehicle ring," the headline read, accompanied by a grainy picture of him in handcuffs. Neighbors who once waved with warm smiles now avoided eye contact. Customers stopped bringing their cars to the shop. Overnight, Marcus went from being a trusted community man to a name whispered with suspicion. Amara sat in the courtroom's waiting area the next day, surrounded by murmurs and judgmental stares. Her father was being denied bail. The prosecutor painted him as a potential flight risk, claiming his connections in the neighborhood made him dangerous. It was absurd, yet the judge barely blinked. Papers were signed, and Marcus was taken back to holding. Amara's stomach twisted with helpless rage. She had seen courtroom dramas before, but nothing prepared her for the real thing. The cold detachment, the mechanical words, the feeling that truth didn't matter. She kept replaying every detail: the inspector's visit, the false accusations, the police's tone. It all felt orchestrated. Later that night, she went through her father's shop records, determined to find proof of his innocence. She discovered invoices, part orders, and a repair log. Everything was meticulous and transparent. The stolen car he'd supposedly worked on was listed there, too, under a customer's real name. But when Amara checked the records, she found something strange. The form had been altered after the arrest. Someone had changed the dates. That's when it hit her. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a setup. Her heart pounded as she stared at the papers. She remembered how uneasy Marcus had been about the inspector, how those questions weren't about safety but suspicion. The system wasn't interested in finding the truth. It was looking for someone to blame. And in that town, a black man running a small business was an easy target. Amara knew then that waiting for justice wasn't enough. She would have to make it happen, even if no one believed her. She gathered the documents, organized them carefully, and whispered to herself, "You told me to save my fire, Dad. I think it's time." The weeks that followed turned Amara's world into a blur of paperwork, deadlines, and quiet despair. Every morning she woke up to the same hollow silence, her father's chair empty at the breakfast table, his laughter replaced by the hum of the refrigerator. Each day without him felt heavier, each visit to the detention center more painful. Marcus tried to stay strong, reassuring her that it would all work out, but Amara could see the fatigue in his eyes. "You keep believing, baby girl," he'd say through the glass divider. "That's what keeps me going." But belief alone couldn't change the facts, or the lies that were quickly building against him. The prosecution claimed they had eyewitnesses and evidence connecting Marcus to a ring of car thieves. Every time Amara tried to request records, she hit a wall of red tape and indifference. Even her father's public defender seemed uninterested, overworked, underpaid, and barely listening during meetings. That's when Amara made a decision that would change everything. She would represent him herself, not legally, not officially, but with every ounce of knowledge she had. She began spending nights in the university library, reading case studies, watching trial recordings, and studying every law related to false accusations. She filled notebooks with details, highlighting inconsistencies, writing down every moment that didn't make sense. One evening, while reviewing the police report for the 10th time, she noticed something that made her heart stop. The officer listed as the arresting witness, the same inspector who had first visited the shop, had a disciplinary record for falsifying evidence in another case, a fact that was quietly buried under internal review. That was it. That was the thread she needed to pull. Amara knew exposing that wouldn't be easy. The system protected itself. But the more she uncovered, the stronger her resolve became. She wasn't just fighting for her father anymore. She was fighting for every family that the same quiet cruelty had broken. As the court date approached, the tension in the town grew thick. Reporters lingered outside their home, neighbors whispered, and friends distanced themselves. But Amara didn't flinch. On the morning of the trial, she stood in front of the mirror, dressed in her father's favorite color, deep blue, and whispered to herself, "You taught me to fight fair. Dad, Now I'll show them what fair really means. When she walked into the courtroom that day, holding her files tight against her chest, the room fell silent. The judge's eyes carried the same dismissive look she'd seen before. But this time, Amara wasn't afraid. This time, she was ready to turn their silence into justice. The courtroom was colder than she expected. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed louder than the whispers that filled the air. When Amara walked in, every head turned, some curious, others already sure of what they believed. Reporters scribbled notes. The prosecutor shuffled papers. And behind the tall mahogany bench sat Judge Harrison, a man whose gaze carried the weight of quiet prejudice. Amara swallowed hard and took her seat beside her father. Marcus's hands were cuffed, but his eyes still carried that same steady calm that always centered her. "Whatever happens," he whispered, "you keep your head, you hear?" She nodded, gripping her notebook so tightly her knuckles whitened. The prosecutor rose first, a tall, confident man named David Cole. His voice filled the room like a performance. "Your Honor, the state intends to prove that the defendant, Marcus Williams, knowingly participated in the concealment and resale of stolen vehicles through his auto repair business." Each word landed like a hammer. Amara glanced toward the jury. 6 men, 6 women, but none who looked like her father. Most stared blankly, one scribbled notes, and another avoided eye contact. When the defense attorney stood, a weary man assigned by the court, his words felt small, almost apologetic. "Your Honor, my client maintains his innocence. He is a respected member of his community." Harrison nodded but didn't smile. "We'll see," he said, turning to Cole. "Proceed." The first witness was the police inspector, the same man who'd questioned Marcus weeks earlier. His badge gleamed under the lights. His testimony was clean, rehearsed, and full of subtle venom. He described finding suspicious paperwork, hidden parts, and unexplained money transfers, none of which Amara recognized from the files she'd reviewed. Her pulse raced. Each statement twisted the truth just enough to sound believable. She wanted to shout, "That's a lie," but she couldn't. Not yet. During the recess, she approached the defense lawyer with a folder of her own notes. "You need to challenge the chain of evidence," she urged. "Those car part serial numbers were altered after the seizure." He looked at her blankly. "Miss Williams, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't law school. The prosecution's evidence is strong." "Strong because you're not questioning it," she hissed. "You're letting them win before the fight even starts." He sighed, eyes tired. "Look, sweetheart, don't call me that," she snapped, voice trembling with fury. Before he could respond, the bailiff called everyone back. The next witness was a supposed customer, a man who claimed Marcus had warned him not to talk about a repair. The story didn't match the records, but no one seemed to care. As Amara watched, she realized this wasn't a search for truth. It was theater. Every detail that might have helped her father was brushed aside. Every vague claim against him was magnified. She began taking frantic notes, marking inconsistencies, wrong dates, mismatched signatures, altered invoices. Her mind worked faster than her fear. "If I can line up these statements against the original shop records," she thought, "I can show the contradictions." But Judge Harrison seemed impatient whenever the defense spoke. When Cole objected, it was sustained. When the defense did, it was overruled. The pattern was evident and cruelly familiar. By the end of the day, Marcus was slumped in his chair, exhausted. The cuffs bit into his wrists, yet he managed a faint smile for his daughter. "You see how they look at me?" he whispered. "Like the verdict's already printed." Amara bit her lip to keep from crying. "Then we'll rewrite it," she whispered back. As the judge adjourned for the day, Amara gathered her papers. On the table beside the prosecutor's briefcase, she noticed something. A flash drive, small and unlabeled. Cole had accidentally left it there while packing up. She glanced around. No one noticed. Her heart pounded. Could it be evidence? She reached toward it, then froze. The bailiff's heavy footsteps echoed closer. She pulled her hand back just in time. When she finally stepped outside into the fading evening light, Amara drew a shaky breath. The courthouse steps felt steeper than ever. Every instinct screamed that something in that courtroom was being buried. Something that the flash drive might reveal. She looked up at the tall building, its windows glowing pale against the dusk. "You think you can twist the truth," she whispered under her breath. "But I'm not done yet." The wind carried her words away, but her resolve stayed. Tomorrow she would come back, stronger, sharper, and ready to tear every lie apart. What Amara didn't know was that before the next day's session ended, someone else would make sure she never got close to that evidence. The next morning, the courthouse buzzed louder than usual. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing as Amara and her father were escorted inside. The story had gained traction. Local mechanic's daughter challenges corrupt system, but the media's interest wasn't comfort. It was spectacle. Inside, Amara felt that same chill again. Judge Harrison took his seat, face unreadable. David Cole, the prosecutor, stood ready, his briefcase neatly arranged, the missing flash drive nowhere in sight. Amara hadn't slept much. Her mind kept replaying the moment she saw it. That tiny drive left behind like a secret waiting to be found. If it honestly held evidence, why hide it? Why not share it in open court? The first witness that morning was a police technician. He spoke about forensic evidence from Marcus's shop, parts allegedly linked to stolen cars. He explained how the serial numbers matched records from ongoing investigations. His tone was clinical and confident, but something in his testimony made Amara's stomach twist. The technician claimed to have logged the evidence on a Tuesday. Amara remembered the arrest was on a Thursday, 2 days before her father was even accused. She scribbled the timeline down in her notebook, her pen trembling. When the defense lawyer failed to notice the contradiction, she couldn't take it anymore. During a short recess, she approached him again. "Did you hear that?" "He said he logged the evidence 2 days early." He rubbed his temples. "Miss Williams, I can't make the judge angry over small inconsistencies." "Small?" she snapped. That small detail could prove this was planted. He didn't respond, just walked away, muttering about young people and their theories. Frustration burned in her chest. No one was listening. Not the court. Not the system, not even the person meant to defend her father. So Amara did what she always did. She took matters into her own hands. That evening, she returned to the courthouse under the pretext of retrieving a forgotten notebook. The security guard, a kind, older man who'd watched the trial quietly, gave her a sympathetic nod and let her in. "You've got a good heart, miss," he said softly. "Just be careful who's watching." Inside the empty courtroom, the silence felt heavier than the gavel's echo. She scanned the tables. Cole's papers were gone, the judge's bench cleared. But near the evidence table, half hidden beneath folders, she spotted something glinting, the flash drive. Her pulse quickened. She slipped it into her pocket and hurried out, her steps echoing down the marble corridor. That night, in her small apartment, she connected the drive to her laptop. It took a moment to load, then a folder appeared labeled Case 4217, Williams. Inside were photos, reports, and a series of short video clips. The first video made her blood run cold. It showed the inspector, the same officer who'd arrested her father, talking to the prosecutor in a dimly lit parking lot. Their voices were muffled, but one phrase stood out clearly. "Make sure the paperwork matches before we file." "The girl won't know the difference." "The girl! They were talking about her!" Amara leaned back, heart pounding, bile rising in her throat. It was proof, not just of misconduct, but of conspiracy. She scrolled further. Emails, document edits, timestamps, all pointing to one thing. Her father's case wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. But just as she tried to copy the files, the screen flickered. A message appeared. "Access denied. Encrypted data removed." And then, everything vanished. Her heart stopped. She tried refreshing and reopening, but the folder was gone, deleted. Somehow someone was watching. A knock rattled her door. She froze. The clock read 11:47 p.m. Slowly, she approached, peering through the peephole. No one there. But on the floor lay an envelope. Inside, a single piece of paper with one typed sentence. "You're in over your head, Miss Williams. Stop digging." Her hands shook as she looked around her small apartment, suddenly aware of every shadow. She locked the door, shut the curtains, and sat on the floor, her back against the wall. Tears welled in her eyes, part fear, part fury. She had proof, even if they'd erased it, proof that her father wasn't just a victim of bias, but of corruption. And someone out there would rather silence her than let the truth come out. She whispered to herself, voice breaking, "You picked the wrong girl to scare." Outside, thunder rumbled across the city. The same storm that had once taken her father away, now returning. Louder, closer. Tomorrow, she would face them again. But this time, she wouldn't just be her father's daughter. She would be their biggest threat. The morning after the threat, the courthouse felt colder. The skies outside were gray, clouds pressed low against the old building like a warning. Amara clutched her father's old wristwatch, the one thing they hadn't confiscated, and whispered a silent prayer before walking in. She was terrified. But beneath the fear, there was something else now. Resolve. Her father sat quietly at the defendant's table, his face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes calm when they met hers. That look gave her strength. Judge Harrison called the court to order, his gavel striking the wood with finality. "We will resume the People versus Marcus Williams." The prosecutor, David Cole, began with the same smug confidence as before, presenting another expert witness. This officer claimed to have received an anonymous tip linking Marcus to stolen vehicles. But as Cole spoke, Amara's mind replayed the video she'd seen before it was deleted. That parking lot conversation, the phrase about matching paperwork. When the defense attorney finally stood to cross-examine, Amara leaned forward, whispering urgently, "Ask him when he received the anonymous tip. The date." Her lawyer frowned, irritated. "Miss Williams, please, just do it," she hissed. He sighed but complied. "Officer, can you remind the court what day you received this anonymous information?" The officer hesitated. Wednesday evening, around 9 p.m. "And when was the warrant for Mr. Williams's arrest filed?" "Thursday morning, 8:30. Amara leaned forward again. "Ask him who signed it." The lawyer raised an eyebrow, clearly not understanding the trap she was setting, but went along with it. "Who authorized that warrant?" "The prosecutor's office, Mr. Cole himself." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Amara's heart hammered. It matched the timeline from the deleted file. Cole had already been involved before the supposed tip came in. The anonymous source was a fabrication. Cole quickly stood, objecting. "Your Honor, this line of questioning is irrelevant to the charges." Judge Harrison frowned. "Overruled. I'd like to hear where this is going." Cole's jaw tightened, but his eyes flicked toward Amara. Sharp. Warning. She didn't flinch. The rest of the testimony unraveled under pressure. The officer grew visibly nervous, fumbling with his notes contradicting his earlier statements. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances. For the first time, the confidence on the prosecution's side began to crack. During the recess, Amara stepped out into the hallway. Cole was waiting there, leaning casually against a marble pillar. "You're brave, Miss Williams," he said softly. "But you don't know how deep this goes." Amara met his gaze. "I don't care how deep it goes. I'm not stopping." Cole smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You should. People who dig too far tend to disappear." He brushed past her, his words lingering in the air like smoke. Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to breathe. She couldn't show fear. Not now. Not when the truth was so close. That night she returned to the courthouse records office. She'd memorized the encryption key that flashed on her laptop before the files were deleted, an 8-digit code followed by HC. It might be nothing, but she had to try. She logged into the digital evidence archive, scrolling through the case numbers until she found it. Case 4217HC, the same label from the flash drive. Inside was a single document titled Chain of Custody Log. And there it was. The evidence had been checked in by Officer Lang, supervised by D. Cole. But the timestamp, it was 1 day earlier than the alleged discovery date. It was proof in official records. The next morning, she handed a printed copy to her defense lawyer. "File this. It's illegal tampering. If you don't, I will." He blinked at her, startled. "Where did you get this?" "Doesn't matter." "What matters is it's real." He hesitated, then sighed, defeated. "All right, Miss Williams. We'll submit it." When the court resumed, Cole looked rattled as the document was introduced into evidence. He objected furiously, claiming unauthorized access and privacy violations, but Judge Harrison silenced him. "Mr. Cole," the judge said evenly, "if the document is authentic, the court will review its contents. You'll have a chance to respond." Amara watched the prosecutor's composure crumble for the first time. His jaw tightened, and his hand trembled slightly as he shuffled his papers. The defense called Amara to the stand. Her heart pounded, but she rose. The room fell silent. "Miss Williams," her lawyer began, "you've been very involved in your father's defense. Can you explain why?" She nodded slowly. "Because no one else would. Because I watched my father be accused of something he didn't do, and everyone treated it like the truth before he even spoke. Because I saw evidence being twisted, and I knew if I stayed quiet, they'd destroy him." Her voice shook, not with fear but emotion. "I found proof that the case against him was built before the investigation even began." "That's not justice. That's power pretending to be truth." The jurors' eyes were locked on her now. Even Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly. Cole objected again, his voice rising. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation." "Overruled," the judge said firmly. Amara took a breath, her hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. "You can call it whatever you want, but my father taught me that when something's wrong, you don't look away even if no one believes you, even if you're alone." Silence filled the courtroom. Even Cole didn't speak. When the session ended, Amara walked out into the corridor, her knees weak, her pulse still racing. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time she felt the weight beginning to shift. As she stepped outside, the clouds finally broke. Rain poured down, washing the courthouse steps clean. She looked up at the sky, letting the rain soak her face. Somewhere deep inside she knew. This wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been silenced, and she wasn't backing down. By the next morning, the courthouse felt different. There was a buzz in the air, quiet but charged. People whispered in the halls, phones clicked with camera flashes, and reporters lingered near the steps like vultures waiting for the next move. Amara had barely slept. Her face showed it, but so did her resolve. The document she'd uncovered, the one showing the falsified timestamp, had already spread. A journalist from the Daily Ledger had somehow gotten hold of it overnight. The headline read, "Prosecutor accused of evidence tampering in Williams' trial." The story had exploded online. Comment sections flooded with outrage. Some defended the system, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but most didn't. People were finally paying attention. When Amara walked into the courtroom, the air was thicker than ever. Cameras flashed as she entered. Whispers trailed her every step. Cole was already there, his expression perfectly controlled, but the tension around his mouth betrayed him. He looked like a man standing in a crumbling fortress, pretending not to notice the cracks in the walls. Judge Harrison began. "Before we proceed, I need both counsel's statements regarding the recent media leak." Cole stood first, his voice low but clipped. "Your Honor, this entire fiasco is built on stolen documents. The defense knowingly presented illegally obtained material. The integrity of this court is being compromised." The judge turned to the defense. "Response?" Amara's lawyer rose. "The prosecution can call it whatever they wish, but the truth doesn't become false just because someone wasn't supposed to find it." The room hummed with low murmurs. The judge rapped his gavel sharply. Order. Then his gaze shifted toward Cole. "Mr. Cole, I expect transparency. If the document is authentic, this court will conduct an independent review." Cole's jaw tightened. "Yes, Your Honor." As the hearing resumed, Cole tried to regain control, parading witnesses, reinforcing his narrative, and painting Amara's father as a man hiding behind his daughter's theatrics. But the jurors' faces had changed. The certainty in their eyes was gone. During a recess, Amara sat alone on the courthouse bench, her fingers tracing the smooth edge of her father's watch. Across the hallway, 2 police officers stood whispering, their eyes flicking toward her. She overheard fragments. "She shouldn't have found that file." Cole's furious. "The chief's been calling all morning." Her stomach tightened. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about control. The system was protecting itself. That evening, a reporter approached her outside the courthouse. "Miss Williams, can you confirm you're the one who uncovered the tampered evidence?" Amara hesitated. She knew speaking could make her a target. But silence was exactly what they wanted. "Yes," she said firmly, "and I'll keep uncovering whatever they try to hide. My father deserves justice, and so does everyone else who's been treated like him." The clip aired that night and went viral. By morning, the courthouse steps were flooded with protesters. Placards read, "Justice for Marcus," and "Stop Legal Racism." Chants echoed through the streets. Inside, Cole looked furious. He slammed his briefcase onto the table, papers scattering. "She's turning this into a circus," he muttered under his breath. Amara didn't respond. She sat straight, meeting his glare with quiet defiance. That day, the judge called for a review of the evidence chain. And that's when everything began to unravel. The officer who'd testified earlier, Officer Lang, was called back. His hands shook as he took the stand. "Officer Lang," the judge said evenly, "you verified the evidence collection in this case. Do you stand by your original report?" Lang's throat bobbed. "Your Honor, I followed the procedure. Did you?" the defense lawyer pressed. "Or were you instructed to alter the report before it was submitted?" Lang's eyes darted toward Cole, who stared at him with cold warning. "Answer the question, officer." Lang hesitated. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I was told to adjust the timestamp. I didn't want trouble." Her hands trembled, but she forced herself to breathe. She couldn't show fear, not now. Not when the truth was so close. That night, she returned to the courthouse records office. She'd memorized the encryption key that flashed on her laptop before the files were deleted, an 8-digit code followed by HC. It might be nothing, but she had to try. She logged into the digital evidence archive, scrolling through the case numbers until she found it. Case 4217HC, the same label from the flash drive. Inside was a single document titled Chain of Custody Log. And there it was. The evidence had been checked in by Officer Lang, supervised by D. Cole. But the timestamp, it was 1 day earlier than the alleged discovery date. It was proof in official records. The next morning, she handed a printed copy to her defense lawyer. "File this. It's illegal tampering. If you don't, I will." He blinked at her, startled. "Where did you get this?" "Doesn't matter. What matters is it's real." He hesitated, then sighed, defeated. "All right, Miss Williams. We'll submit it." When the court resumed, Cole looked rattled as the document was introduced into evidence. He objected furiously, claiming unauthorized access and privacy violations. But Judge Harrison silenced him. "Mr. Cole," the judge said evenly, "if the document is authentic, the court will review its contents. You'll have a chance to respond." Amara watched the prosecutor's composure crumble for the first time. His jaw tightened, and his hand trembled slightly as he shuffled his papers. The defense called Amara to the stand. Her heart pounded, but she rose. The room fell silent. "Miss Williams," her lawyer began, "you've been very involved in your father's defense. Can you explain why?" She nodded slowly. "Because no one else would. Because I watched my father be accused of something he didn't do, and everyone treated it like the truth before he even spoke. Because I saw evidence being twisted, and I knew if I stayed quiet, they'd destroy him." Her voice shook, not with fear but emotion. "I found proof that the case against him was built before the investigation even began. That's not justice. That's power pretending to be truth." The jurors' eyes were locked on her now. Even Judge Harrison leaned forward slightly. Cole objected again, his voice rising. "Your Honor, this is emotional manipulation." "Overruled," the judge said firmly. Amara took a breath, her hands gripping the edge of the witness stand. "You can call it whatever you want. But my father taught me that when something's wrong, you don't look away, even if no one believes you. Even if you're alone." Silence filled the courtroom. Even Cole didn't speak. When the session ended, Amara walked out into the corridor, her knees weak, her pulse still racing. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt the weight beginning to shift. As she stepped outside, the clouds finally broke. Rain poured down, washing the courthouse steps clean. She looked up at the sky, letting the rain soak her face. Somewhere deep inside, she knew. This wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been silenced, and she wasn't backing down. By the next morning, the courthouse felt different. There was a buzz in the air, quiet but charged. People whispered in the halls, phones clicked with camera flashes, and reporters lingered near the steps like vultures waiting for the next move. Amara had barely slept. Her face showed it, but so did her resolve. The document she'd uncovered, the one showing the falsified timestamp, had already spread. A journalist from the Daily Ledger had somehow gotten hold of it overnight. The headline read, "Prosecutor accused of evidence tampering in Williams' trial." The story had exploded online. Comment sections flooded with outrage. Some defended the system, claiming it was a misunderstanding. But most didn't. People were finally paying attention. When Amara walked into the courtroom, the air was thicker than ever. Cameras flashed as she entered. Whispers trailed her every step. Cole was already there, his expression perfectly controlled, but the tension around his mouth betrayed him. He looked like a man standing in a crumbling fortress, pretending not to notice the cracks in the walls. Judge Harrison began. "Before we proceed, I need both counsel's statements regarding the recent media leak." Cole stood first, his voice low but clipped. "Your Honor, this entire fiasco is built on stolen documents. The defense knowingly presented illegally obtained material. The integrity of this court is being compromised." The judge turned to the defense. "Response?" Amara's lawyer rose. "The prosecution can call it whatever they wish, but the truth doesn't become false just because someone wasn't supposed to find it." The room hummed with low murmurs. The judge rapped his gavel sharply. "Order." Then his gaze shifted toward Cole. "Mr. Cole, I expect transparency. If the document is authentic, this court will conduct an independent review." Cole's jaw tightened. "Yes, Your Honor." As the hearing resumed, Cole tried to regain control, parading witnesses, reinforcing his narrative, and painting Amara's father as a man hiding behind his daughter's theatrics. But the jurors' faces had changed. The certainty in their eyes was gone. During a recess, Amara sat alone on the courthouse bench, her fingers tracing the smooth edge of her father's watch. Across the hallway, 2 police officers stood whispering, their eyes flicking toward her. She overheard fragments. "She shouldn't have found that file." Cole's furious. "The chief's been calling all morning." Her stomach tightened. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about control. The system was protecting itself. That evening, a reporter approached her outside the courthouse. "Miss Williams, can you confirm you're the one who uncovered the tampered evidence?" Amara hesitated. She knew speaking could make her a target. But silence was exactly what they wanted. "Yes," she said firmly, "and I'll keep uncovering whatever they try to hide. My father deserves justice, and so does everyone else who's been treated like him." The clip aired that night and went viral. By morning, the courthouse steps were flooded with protesters. Placards read, "Justice for Marcus" and "Stop Legal Racism." Chants echoed through the streets. Inside, Cole looked furious. He slammed his briefcase onto the table, papers scattering. "She's turning this into a circus," he muttered under his breath. Amara didn't respond. She sat straight, meeting his glare with quiet defiance. That day, the judge called for a review of the evidence chain, and that's when everything began to unravel. The officer who'd testified earlier, Officer Lang, was called back. His hand shook as he took the stand. "Officer Lang," the judge said evenly, "you verified the evidence collection in this case. Do you stand by your original report?" Lang's throat bobbed. Your Honor, I followed the procedure. Did you? The defense lawyer pressed. Or were you instructed to alter the report before it was submitted? Lang's eyes darted toward Cole, who stared at him with cold warning. Answer the question, officer. Lang hesitated. Sweat beaded on his forehead. I was told to adjust the timestamp. I didn't want trouble. Amara sat beside her father at the defense table, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The room was packed, every seat taken, reporters, activists, curious onlookers, and families who had followed the trial from the beginning. Judge Harrison entered, his expression unreadable. Cole sat across the aisle, still immaculate in his suit, but his eyes were haunted. The last few days had changed everything. The flash drive was verified, the records confirmed, and Officer Lang had resigned, issuing a quiet apology through his lawyer. Still, Amara couldn't breathe. Her entire body trembled with the weight of what was coming. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. All rise. As they sat, Judge Harrison cleared his throat. Over the past weeks, this court has witnessed serious revelations regarding evidence tampering and prosecutorial misconduct. However, the verdict before us today concerns only one question: the guilt or innocence of Marcus Williams. Amara's chest tightened. Her father reached out, placing a steady hand over hers. His palm was rough, warm, the same hand that had once guided her across busy streets when she was little. "Whatever happens," he whispered. "You did well, baby." Her eyes filled, but she blinked them away. The judge turned toward the jury. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" The woman in the front row stood, holding a folded paper. Her hands trembled. "We have, Your Honor." The silence was unbearable. In the case of the People versus Marcus Williams, "We find the defendant." The world seemed to stop. Amara's heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Not guilty!" Gasps broke through the courtroom. Reporters jumped to their feet. The defense attorney exhaled sharply, covering his face in disbelief. Amara froze. She couldn't even move. Her father turned toward her, eyes wet. "We made it," he whispered, and that was when the tears finally came. She threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder as the noise of the room dissolved into a blur. But in the corner of her eye, she saw something. Cole, standing perfectly still. His gaze was fixed on her, not angry, not defeated, just cold, like a man who had just realized what he'd lost, and who he blamed for it. The verdict was freedom, but Amara could feel it. Something darker was far from over. The cheers from the defense side hadn't even settled when Judge Harrison raised his hand. "Order. I will have order in this court." The crowd quieted, but the energy in the room still pulsed, raw and electric. Amara sat frozen, her father's arm still around her. Marcus was free. The truth had won, or so it seemed, but the judge wasn't done. This court cannot ignore the disturbing evidence of procedural misconduct presented over the course of this trial. He turned sharply toward the prosecution's table. "Mr. Cole, you will remain standing." Cole rose slowly, jaw tight, eyes locked forward. His perfect composure was cracking. "Your office knowingly suppressed evidence," the judge continued, voice like iron. "You allowed bias to corrupt the very institution meant to serve justice. You are hereby suspended pending a full federal investigation." A stunned murmur rippled through the courtroom. Cameras clicked again. Cole's face drained of color. "Your Honor, that's absurd!" He tried to protest. "I did my job." "You abused your power," the judge cut in sharply. "And if the evidence proves intentional harm, you may face disbarment." The words hung heavy in the air. Cole's fingers twitched at his side. His carefully built world, The career, the reputation, the control was slipping through his hands. And for a moment, Amara thought she saw something new in his eyes. Not arrogance, not anger, but fear. As the judge adjourned, reporters surged forward. Cole pushed past them, his voice low and venomous as he brushed near Amara. "You think this is over?" he whispered. "You just ruined everything. For me, for yourself, for your kind." Amara didn't flinch. For the first time in months, she stood tall, her voice steady. "No, Mr. Cole, I didn't ruin anything." "You did!" He froze. The words hitting harder than any verdict could. Outside the courtroom, flashes burst from every direction. Marcus was surrounded by supporters chanting his name. Amara stepped into the sunlight, feeling the warmth on her skin, something she hadn't really felt in weeks. But even as relief washed over her, something else stirred beneath it. A quiet unease, because in the justice system she had just challenged, truth was never the end. It was only the beginning of another kind of war. The courthouse steps were crowded, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Amara shielded her eyes from the glare, with her father close behind, while Marcus shook hands with supporters who called him a symbol of hope. It should have been a victory. It was a victory, but Amara's heart wouldn't slow down. Every noise sounded sharper, every flash felt like lightning. Then she saw him. Cole stood at the edge of the crowd, his tie loosened, face pale, eyes burning with a rage that looked almost broken. The man who once ruled the courtroom with calm precision now looked like a cornered wolf. "Amara!" His voice cut through the noise. The reporters turned. Some began recording again. She froze mid-step. "You should walk away, Cole," she said, steady but wary. "It's over." "Over?" He let out a bitter laugh. "You think one ruling changed anything? You think they'll remember you? They'll forget your name the moment the cameras turn off?" Amara stepped closer, the crowd watching every move. "Maybe, but they'll remember what you did." His smile twisted. "You destroyed my career. For this?" He gestured to the crowd, the shouting, the flashes, the chaos. "For a system that will chew you up next time?" Amara's voice softened. "I didn't do it for the system. I did it because someone had to stand up." Cole's breathing quickened. He reached into his coat. The crowd gasped, and a few people ducked, thinking the worst. But when his hand came out, it wasn't a gun. It was a crushed file, the last piece of evidence he'd hidden. He threw it on the ground between them. "You win, Amara. Congratulations. The world loves its martyrs." Security rushed forward, restraining him as he shouted, "You'll see. Nothing really changes." The crowd buzzed, the scene chaotic. Amara didn't move. She stared down at the scattered papers, photos, signatures, reports, the lies that had almost destroyed her family. Then, quietly, she knelt and picked one up. The words blurred through her tears, not of pain this time, but release. She whispered to herself, barely audible over the noise. Maybe not everything changes today. But something started, and as Cole was dragged away, his voice echoing behind her, Amara finally looked up, not at the cameras, not at the chaos, but at the sky, clear and blindingly bright. For the first time, it felt like the world could see her. The next morning, Amara woke to a storm she didn't expect, not of rain, but of headlines. Her name filled every screen, every social feed. Young black woman outsmarts corrupt judge. The courtroom that changed everything. Hero or headline? Clips of her speech, her face, her trembling hands, all looped endlessly. People she'd never met were calling her brave. Some called her arrogant. Others called her a liar. She scrolled through the noise, each comment cutting deeper than the last. They'll forget you by next week. She's just playing the race card. Finally, someone stood up, her emotions twisted, pride, fear, exhaustion, confusion, all tangled into a knot she couldn't untie. Her father entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of coffee. His hands still trembled, though not from weakness, from everything they'd endured. "You did it, baby girl," he said softly. "You gave us our name back." Amara looked up, tears brimming. "Did I, though? Or did I paint a bigger target on us?" He sat beside her, setting the coffee down. "Maybe both," he said after a moment. "But at least now they see us." Outside their window, reporters still gathered, waiting for a statement. Drones buzzed in the sky, trying to catch a glimpse through the curtains. The fame felt heavy, like chains made of gold. She didn't ask for this. She only wanted justice for her father. But now her story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to the world. Marcus called later that day, voice tired but proud. "We're getting calls from universities, law groups, even rights organizations. They want to feature your case, your speech, your courage." Amara exhaled, staring at her reflection in the dark TV screen. "Courage," she whispered. "That's one word for it." As night fell, the glow from the news screens outside painted their small living room in pale light. Amara stood by the window watching the cameras flash. She thought about Cole's words. Nothing really changes. Maybe he was half right. The system wouldn't fix itself overnight. But as she watched young faces in the crowd holding signs, "Justice for Marcus! Stand with Amara!" she realized something had changed. Not the law, not the system, but the people. And maybe that was enough to begin. The sun was setting over the courthouse when Amara returned one last time. The crowd was gone, the cameras packed up. The echoes of shouting faded into the chill of evening. She stood at the foot of the marble steps, staring up at the doors that once terrified her, the same doors she had walked through shaking. Afraid, small, now they seemed different, not smaller but less powerful. Because she had walked out of them alive, her voice was still hers. Inside, the janitor swept the floor, the faint sound of bristles against tile breaking the silence. He looked up, recognized her, and smiled quietly. "You're the girl who made them listen," he said. Amara smiled faintly. "I just told the truth," he nodded, his eyes kind. "That's the hardest thing to do in this place." She lingered for a while, her steps echoing through the empty courtroom. The judge's seat stood vacant. The flags hung still. The same space that once felt like a trap now looked like a stage where she'd finally learned how to stand tall. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "You gave us our name back." For so long, that name had been whispered in fear, dragged through paperwork and lies. But now it carried something new: dignity. Amara placed her hand on the wooden rail where she had stood to testify. Her fingers traced the grain, remembering every moment. The pounding heart, the stares, the silence, and then, in a whisper to no one but herself, she said, "We're not invisible anymore." Outside, the evening air was cold and sharp. She strolled down the courthouse steps, the street lamps flickering to life one by one. At the bottom, a young girl waited, maybe 12, maybe 13, holding a notebook and a shy smile. "Miss Amara?" the girl asked. My teacher showed us your story. I want to be a lawyer, too. Amara froze. Her throat tightened, her eyes softening. She knelt to the girl's level and said gently, "Then promise me something. Don't just fight for justice. Live like it matters." The girl nodded, clutching her notebook close. As Amara walked away, the courthouse behind her glowed in the fading light. The air felt lighter, her steps steady. The story that began in fear had ended in something else. Not peace, not revenge, but power. And somewhere in the distance, as the night settled in, the city whispered her name, not in pity, but in respect. Days turned into weeks, but the echoes of the trial didn't fade. Amara's name became more than a headline. It became a conversation. In classrooms, teachers replayed her courtroom speech to young students learning about courage. In offices, quiet debates began about fairness and accountability. Even those who once ignored stories like hers found themselves listening, uneasy but curious. But while the world moved forward, Amara struggled to find her new normal. Every time she stepped outside, someone recognized her. A handshake, a thank you, a tearful, "You gave me hope." Yet each compliment carried weight. Because behind every thank you was a story like hers. Someone wronged, silenced, or afraid. At night, she'd sit on the balcony with her father, the city glowing below. Sometimes they didn't speak at all, just sat in the silence that followed war, not the silence of peace, but of recovery. Her father was rebuilding his small law firm, the one that the false charges had nearly destroyed. People trusted him again. Clients returned. But he never forgot how quickly justice had turned its back. "You know," he said one night, looking at the stars, "truth doesn't win by itself. It needs someone stubborn enough to stand there and not move." Amara smiled faintly. "And someone beside them to believe they can." The wind carried their laughter softly through the night. But beneath it, she felt the weight of something larger, the realization that her victory wasn't the end of the fight, just the spark of a much bigger one. She had walked into that courtroom for her father. Now, she understood. She'd have to keep walking for everyone else. A few months later, Amara found herself standing on a stage. Not a courtroom this time, but a community center filled with students, teachers, and local activists. The organizers had begged her to speak. She'd said no at first. She wasn't a hero, she told them. She was just someone who refused to stay quiet. But they insisted, not for fame, but for hope. When she finally stepped up to the microphone, the room went silent. For a moment, she froze, her hands trembling like they did on the witness stand. But then she looked into the faces before her, faces that reminded her of her father, her younger self, the girl who once believed justice was something only other people got. And she began to speak. Not with anger, not with pride, but with honesty. She told them how fear doesn't vanish after victory, how racism doesn't disappear after one verdict. Courage isn't about being unafraid, but about standing even when your voice shakes. Her words flowed like a quiet storm, steady, unstoppable. By the time she finished, the crowd was on its feet. Not clapping for her, but for what she represented, proof that one voice can break through the noise. Afterward, a reporter approached her. "What do you plan to do next, Amara?" he asked. She smiled, a small but confident smile. "I plan to keep talking until people stop acting like this is just a story." That night, as she walked home through the city lights, Amara realized something new. Her strength wasn't in what she survived. It was in what she refused to let die, the truth. Fame, Amara learned, doesn't heal wounds. It only hides them. In the weeks after her speech, invitations poured in. Universities wanted her to speak, organizations asked her to consult, and journalists chased her for exclusive insight. Her inbox overflowed with messages from people who admired her courage and others who mocked her for playing the victim. At first, she tried to answer them all. Every message felt like a thread tying her to something bigger, but soon the threads began to tangle. Some nights she couldn't sleep. The same courtroom sounds echoed in her dreams. The judge's gavel, the whispers, the weight of eyes watching her every breath. Her father noticed. "You're still fighting," he said one morning, pouring her coffee. "But this time it's a different kind of battle." Amara sighed. "It feels like I'm shouting into a storm. Everyone hears me, but no one's really listening." He smiled gently. "Change never comes with applause, Amara. It comes with resistance. That's how you know it's real." Those words stayed with her. One evening, while walking home, she passed a mural painted on a brick wall. Her face, mid-speech, under the words, "We're not invisible anymore." She stopped, staring at it. It wasn't vanity she felt. It was disbelief, because somewhere along the line, her pain had become a symbol. A little boy walked past and pointed at the mural. "That's her, right?" he asked his mother. His mother nodded. "Yes, baby. That's Amara. She's why people started listening." Amara turned away, tears stinging her eyes. Not from sorrow, but from the realization that maybe she was being heard after all. Months passed, and with each one, Amara's resolve grew sharper. She no longer wanted to talk about justice. She tried to build it. She joined a small group of young lawyers and community leaders who were working to reform the legal aid system. Together, they created a program that offered free legal defense to families who couldn't afford representation, the kind of families who would have been silenced, just like hers once was. At first, progress was slow. The meetings were long, the funds limited, and the opposition fierce. But every time she felt her motivation waver, Amara remembered the courtroom, her father's trembling hands, Cole's smirk, the sound of the gavel striking as if sealing their fate. She swore she'd never let another innocent person stand in that room alone. Her work began to spread. Within a year, the program expanded across neighboring cities. Newspapers ran headlines like, "From Defendant to Defender, Amara's Mission for Change." But she didn't do it for recognition. Each victory was quiet. A single case won, a single family helped, a single person who no longer felt invisible. One evening, during a seminar, a student asked her, "After everything you've seen, do you really believe justice can change?" Amara paused, her gaze steady. "Justice isn't broken," she said softly. "It's buried. And every time we speak up, we help dig it out." The room fell silent, not out of awe, but reflection. That night, as Amara locked up the office, she smiled faintly at the plaque on the door. Marcus and Amara Legal Initiative for Justice. The same name that once trembled in court now stood for strength. Years later, the courthouse stood unchanged, the same white pillars, the same echoing halls. But for Amara, it no longer symbolized fear. It was history. She returned on the anniversary of the verdict, not for another case, but for a ceremony. A plaque had been installed in the main hallway, honoring landmark cases that reshaped local justice. Among them was one name etched in silver, the State versus Marcus Lewis, defended by Amara Lewis. Her father stood beside her, older now, but his pride still glowing. "We came here once afraid," he said quietly. "Now look, our story's part of the law." Amara traced her fingers over the engraving, her reflection mirrored in the polished surface. "It's not just ours anymore," she whispered. "It belongs to everyone who's still fighting to be seen." As they stepped outside, a small group of young law students approached her. They wanted advice, inspiration, maybe even courage. One girl said softly, "You made me believe I could change something." Amara smiled. The same calm confidence that once wavered now rooted deep in her. "You can," she said. "But remember, justice doesn't start in a courtroom. It starts when you refuse to stay silent," the students nodded. Their notebooks clutched like promises. As Amara walked down those familiar courthouses' steps one last time, the city's noise rose around her, cars, voices, life moving forward. Yet beneath it all, there was something new. The quiet hum of hope. The story that began with injustice had ended in awakening. Because sometimes, one person's courage isn't just survival, it's a spark. And as long as voices are willing to rise against silence, that spark will never die. "The question isn't whether justice can change," her voice echoed softly. "It's whether we're brave enough to keep demanding it."